morning, everyone. A very good morning. Shall we begin the session? Yes, today's topic is the ODBC. In the last class, we finished with the JDBC, that is Java Database Connectivity. Next one is the ODBC, that is Open Database Connectivity, that includes the C, that includes the C++. This is the Open Database Connectivity. So this defines, or ODBC standard defines an API that an application can use to open a connection and sends the query, updates, and get back the results. And applications such as the GUI, graphical user interface, and statistical parts that may also use the ODBC, that may include the runtime error, that may include the environment, that may include the database connection. Now this is one of the example, void ODBC example. This is retrieve code error. Next at HENV environment, ENV, then HDBC connection or database connection, then SQL alloc environment, alloc connection, that is DB, Yale, EDU, then SQL NTS, then availability, SQL NTS, availability passwords, it's SQL NT, then using the cat department name 80. Next variable taken out as a department name, that is of the cat type, and this is of the array type that contains 80 elements from 0 to 79. The next one is the float salary. Salary is the name of the variable and float is the data type. Then int len out1, len out2. Then HSTMT, STMT, then char pointer SQL query. What is SQL query? Select department name, some salary from instructor that is grouped by the department name. Then SQL allot STMT, connection STMT, then error equals to, now what output is stored in the error. This is the SQL execute direct. STMT, SQL query, SQL NTS. So this is SQL NTS, and if error equals to success or SQL success, then SQL bind column equals to STMT, then STMT1 SQL char, then department name 80 len out1. Then in the same way bind call STMT2 SQL C float salary 0 len out2. In the same way we are using the while loop for checking the condition. If SQL fetch STMT is equals to SQL success, then print SG depth name salary. Then SQL free STMT, SQL drop, then SQL disconnect con, SQL free connect con, then SQL free environment ENV. That is using the spreadsheet that use a mix of the ODBC API to connect to any database server that supports ODBC. And each database system also supporting ODBC provides a library that must be linked with the client program, and when the client program makes an ODBC API call, it uses an application programming interface. The code in the library communicate with the server to carry out the requested action and also fetches the result. So next figure that shows an example of the C language using the ODBC API. What is the first step? That is to communicate with the server is to set up a connection. So first step is to set up a connection with the server, and to do so the program first allocates an SQL environment, then database connection handler, then it defines the types HENV, HDBC, retrieve code, and then program opens the database connection by using the SQL connect, and this will take several parameters including the connection handle, including the server to which to connect, user identifier, password for the database, constant SQL NTS, then also denotes that the previous argument is a null terminating string. And once the connection is set up, the program can send the SQL commands to the database by using the SQL execute direct. And this language, that is the C language variables, can be found or can be bound to attribute to the query result, so that when a result tuple is fetched out using the SQL fetch, The attributes values are stored in the corresponding C variables. And the SQL bind call function does this task for using the argument type, for using the identification of the position of the attributes that is given in the query result, and the third argument indicates the type conversion that is required from SQL to the C. Next argument that gives the address of the variable for the variable length types like the character array. The last two arguments gives the maximum length of the variable and the location where the actual length is to be stored when a tuple is fetched out. And the negative value returned for the length field that indicates that the value will be fetched is null. And for the fixed length type such as the integer or the float, the maximum length type field is ignored out, while a negative value returned for the length field indicates a null value. Negative null values in the same way, maximum length also ignored. Then we have used the SQL fetch statement is in while loop that has been executed until the SQL fetch returns a value other than the SQL success. And on each fetch, the program stores the value in the C variables as specified by the call from the SQL bind call and print out these values. It is also possible to create an SQL statement with the parameter. For example, consider the statement insert into department values, whatever the value that is available. The question mark are the placeholder for the values that will be supplied later. So in this case, when we are prepared to compile the database, and that is executed by providing the actual values for the placeholders. And in this case, providing a department name, providing a building and a budget for the relation department. In the same way, ODBC also defines a function for a variety of the tasks, such as finding all the relations in the database, finding the names and the types of columns of a query result, or a relation in the database. And by default, when we are using the SQL statement, that is treated as a separate transaction that is committed automatically. And SQL set connection option turns off the automatic commit on connection cone, and the transaction must be committed explicitly by the SQL transact. That includes two parameters, two arguments. One is a cone, one is a SQL commit. That will be rolled back by the SQL transact. That is a cone and the SQL rollback. And yes, ODBC also defines conformance levels, which specify the subsets of the functionality defined by the standard. And by using the ODBC implementation, that also provides the core level features, and that may also include the advanced feature, level 1, level 2 features that is used for fetching the result about the catalog, to what relation are present and the types of their attributes. And level 2 requires a further feature such as the ability to send and retrieve the array of the parameter values and also retrieve more catalog information within the CLI call level interface that is similar to the ODBC interface. The next one is the embedded SQL. That is a SQL within a SQL that is known as the embedded SQL. So SQL also defines, or SQL standard defines, the embedding of the SQL in a variety of the programming languages: C, C++, COBOL, Pascal, Java, Fortran. And this language is in SQL queries are embedded is referred as a host language, and the SQL structure permitted in the host language also constitute the embedded SQL. And whatever the program that is written in the host language that can use the embedded SQL syntax to access and update the data standards or data stored in a database. And when we talk about the embedded SQL program, that must be processed by SQL preprocessor prior to the compilation that will be used with the database access. And this is the main distinction between the embedded SQL and the JDBC or the ODBC. That means it is using the host language declaration procedure call that also that allows the runtime execution of the database access. Then the resulting program is also compiled by the host language compiler. And when I talk about the JDBC, so SQL statements are interpreted at the runtime, even if they are prepared first using the prepared statement feature. And when it is using the embedded SQL is used, some SQL related errors that may be caught at the compile time. So to identify the embedded SQL request to the preprocessor, we use the executable SQL statement that has a form exec executable or execute SQL, then embedded SQL statement. Then the current syntax for the embedded SQL request depends on the language in which SQL is embedded out, and in some languages such as a COBOL, semicolon is also replaced with end exec. Then we place the statement SQL include SQL CA in the program to identify the place where the preprocessor should insert the special variables, communication between the program and the database systems. And before executing any SQL statement, the program must first connect to the database. That is done using exec SQL connect to server user username using password. Here server identifies the server to which a connection is to be established. And variables of the host language can be used within embedded SQL statement, but they are declared with a colon also. They are declared with to differentiate from the SQL variable that must be used above or that must be used as above must be declarative with the declared section. And the correct syntax is exec SQL begin declare section int credit amount exec SQL end declare statement. So this is SQL begin declare section, then exec SQL end declare section. Then when we talk about the embedded SQL statement that are also similar in form to the regular SQL statements. And there are, however, several important differences that we note down. So to write a relational query, we use a declare cursor statement that this query is also fetched out, that is not computed. Rather than the program must open the or must use the open and fetch commands to obtain the result tuples. And as we shall see, use of a cursor is also analogous to iterating through a result set in the JDBC. And when we talk about the university example, the same example that the schema, so we use the host language variable credit amount in our program that is declared as a set variable that is declared as a credit amount for the credit hours. This is exec SQL declare C cursor for select ID name from student where total credit is greater than credit amount. The variable C in the preceding expression is also a cursor for the query, and we use this variable to identify the query. So we then open or use open statement which causes the query to be evaluated. This is exec SQL open C for the temporary location. Now let's start with the next topic, that is the functions and the procedures. So we already seen multiple functions that are built in into the SQL language, like SQL function, like string function. So there are multiple inbuilt functions. In this section, we show how developers can write their own functions and the procedure, store them in the database, then invoke them from the SQL statement. Functions are particularly useful with specialized data types such as images and geometric objects. For example, a line segment data type used in a map database may have an associated function that checks whether the two line segments overlap, and image data type that can be used as associated functions to compare two images for the similarity. Now, procedures and the functions, whatever the procedure, whatever the function we are dealing with, that allows the business logic to be stored in the database and executed from the SQL statement. For example, universities usually have many rules about how many courses a student can take in a semester. The minimum number of courses a full-time instructor must teach in a year, the maximum number of majors a student can enroll, and so on. So this can be applied using a function also. And while such business logic can be encoded as programming language procedures that stored entirely outside the database, defining them as a stored procedures in the database, then also use the multiple advantages. What is the main advantage? For example, when we talk about the multiple applications to access the procedures, that allows a single point of change in the case the business rule change, without changing other parts of the application. So application code can then use or call the stored procedure instead of directly updating the business or database relations. Then SQL also allows the definitions of the functions, procedures, and the method. These can be defined either by the procedural component of SQL or by external programming language such as the Java, C, or the C++. Now we look at the definitions in the SQL first and see how to use definitions in external languages. And although the syntax we present is defined by the SQL standard, that most databases implement non-standard versions of the syntax. For example, when we talk about the procedure languages that is supported by the Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, PostgreSQL, that also differs from the SQL standard or the standard syntax that we present here. So this is the create function, department count, department name, varchar 20, then returns integer, begin, declare dcount integer, select count asterisk into dcount from instructor where instructor or department name is equals to department name, then return the dcount. That means we have created one function that is a department count, dpt underscore count, then department name taking the variable as a department name that is of data type varchar and the so size is 20, then returns the integer, begin, declare dcount integer, count asterisk into dcount from instructor, where instructor or department name is department name. So we illustrate where differences of the Oracle also for further improvements. Next is how to declare and invoke SQL functions and procedures. So select department name budget from instructor where department count, department name is greater than 12. And the SQL standard supports a function that can return the table as a result. It can return the relation or the table as a result that are known as a table function. Now, consider the function that is defined over here. So the function returns a table containing all the instructors of a particular department. And note that the function's parameter is referenced by prefixing it with the name of the function, that is the instructor of department name. And functions or the function that can be used in a query is as follows. Select extract from table instructor of finance, and this query returns all the instructors of the finance department. That is straightforward to write this query without using the table valued functions. And in general, however, when we use or when we are talking about the table valued function, that can be thought of a parameterized view that generalizes a regular notation of the views by allowing the parameters. This is create function instructors of department name varchar 20 returns table id varchar 5 name varchar 20 department name varchar 20 salary numeric 82. Then return table select id name department name salary from instructor where instructor or department name is instructor of department name. And SQL also supports the procedures. Department count function could be instead be written as a procedure. So we can either use the functions or the procedures. This is create procedure department count proc in department name varchar 20 out dcount integer begin select count into dcount from instructor where instructor dot department name equals to department count proc dot department name then end. And the keywords in and out indicates respectively parameters that are expected to have values assigned to them. And parameters whose values are set in the procedure in order to return the results. So procedures can be invoked either from SQL procedure or from the embedded SQL by the call statement. This is declare dcount integer call department count proc physics dcount. Then procedures and functions can be invoked from the dynamic SQL, and this permits more than one procedure of the same name. So as long as the number of the arguments of the procedure with the same name is different, that is used along with the number of the arguments used to identify the procedure also, and SQL also permits more than one function with the same name, that is known as a function overloading. Then language that is used for the procedure and the function is known as a PSM, persistent